Thank you. Thank you. I think we spent a very well-connected morning to what we're going to do today, right now. And I think the fact that we co-created this, it was a good idea to have a keynote that's related to the panel discussion that follow. So you're able to relate to what happened earlier, and this one will be even closer to what happened in the panel earlier. I think we talked about data being related to creativity in some way. This subject that we are going to discuss today is how good data embellishes creativity. So it's a little spin on that same thing, but I think it's more to do with, you may, of course, in order to make the points from our own lives, each of us who are from different professions, on soft goods and advertising and communications, there's Jhala. Then in engineering, service and consumer durable experience, there's Krishna here. Kiran, of course, technology and many other marketing. And Sanjay, of course, is overarching everywhere. I don't have to pigeonhole him into something. So in each of our approaches, while it is tempting to set the framework when we talk about data helping creativity, we tend to think of probably advertising first, largely because creativity is sort of bandied there. But like I've assured each one of us, that creativity, whether it's in the advertising or the advertising process or product, innovation, what Apple does, or how a new process, for example, Krishna has some background on how service has got sort of ruined in certain sectors because of the process, and yet you think out of the box. So for the purpose of the discussion, creativity, we won't restrict to only one element. We're saying that creativity is where you actually solve a problem differently using some original ideas and using something which hasn't been done before. So just to set the context, we're saying that we're all chasing big ideas in whatever we do, in whichever profession, whichever sector we're talking about. And sometimes leapfrogging or thinking laterally helps us get out of what we are used to. So that will be the context in which each of our own personal experiences on how good data has actually embellished creativity. In other words, some misnomers I want to get out of the way. For example, data and insight. Now, there was some conflict, I think, in some of the points raised earlier. We don't see them as conflicting each other. We're saying data is not necessarily quantitative, but tends to be bracketed as quantitative, and insight tends to be bracketed as qualitative. And personally, I have a question which I'll throw up open to the audience as to why hasn't there been a bigger idea than insight in actually arriving at creativity. So I think we'll take that up right at the end. But to start it off, I will first hand it over to Kiran here, and he can sort of give us his perspective on how, in his experience, how good data has actually embellished creativity. Yeah, I'll keep on. Thanks.
Thanks. Am I audible? Can you hear me? Okay. So I think I'm just going to be the villain in this piece, because if you go back to what Drayton Bird said, technologists don't understand marketing. But I have a slightly different point of view, which is, the more and more you look at the role that technology is playing in marketing, and I say marketing as a broader concept that includes, communication, PR, marketing, content, right, copy, whatever. You take the entire spectrum of marketing. I think technology is beginning to play, I would say, a pivotal role. It's not just a peripheral role, but actually a decisive role in the way we go to market, the way we communicate. So much so that I think a coined phrase to describe people like us who've been in the technology industry but specialize in this function called marketing, we've been called chief marketing technologists, right? So that's a new phrase that's been coined to describe people like us who are kind of between two worlds and who connect the dots. So that's I really wanted to open with that comment. Just to draw a parallel between creativity and maybe if you take an example like sport, right? And it's a very drastic example I'm giving here, but so I had a chance to, so we had Rahul Dravid over at one of our forums late last year. And in a conversation with Rahul Dravid, I was just trying to figure out, actually I was trying to test my luck here, and I said, does data and analytics play a role in cricket, right? And he said, absolutely yes. And I was quite shocked. I thought he would probably say, what's that? What's data? What's analytics? But the reaction I got was, yes, absolutely, it plays a role. He said, if you had asked me this question possibly a year and a half or 2 years ago, and if you ask me what is data, what is cloud, what is mobile, what is social, my answer would have probably been, cloud is something that keeps a cricket game away. And that's the best I would know about cloud. But he says today, he said a lot of team decision making, right? A lot of decision making on batting order, on choice of bowlers, what type of ball to bowl to a batsman in the last 3 balls of the game is all hinged on deep analytics. And he said while there is a lot of intuition that he's used in selecting players for Rajasthan Royals in his avatar as a team manager and coach, he said, yes, there is a lot of intuition, a lot of judgment that I use in team selection, but when I need to validate what I have thought I should do, that's when data comes in. So I think the marriage between validation of creative judgment, I think that's really where interestingly, cricket uses a lot of data. The other example I had to give was within the sphere of technology itself. Again, something that I don't know if any of you could ever imagine. Is there a possibility that a computer cooks you food, right? Can a computer deliver recipes based on human intelligence? And that's happening. I'm not marketing this here, but sometime around 4 o'clock, do take a walk, in the pre-function area, and you will see a concept called cognitive cooking. Now, let me simplify it. It's pretty simple, right? It's all about when a lot of human interaction happens with the computer, right? That means chefs across the world have been talking to the machine and inputting recipes, inputting ingredients. The computer uses its own algorithms to come up with unique recipes based on certain algorithms it runs in the back end. So it uses human content, human input, it processes it, lot of data that goes in. It absorbs data from social media, from keyboard, that you input into the machine through voice. It actually converges all that and converts it into usable recipes. So when you do have an opportunity today, do walk across to the cognitive cooking area, and you'll find the chef from Le Meridien dishing out recipes created by Watson, which is a computer. So, so if you really look at the two extremes, so you have sport, where data is used to balance judgment and intuition, and then you've got cooking, where actually a lot of data is processed by the computer to give you what it calls the most optimal recipe, right? So these really are the points I wanted to convey, that you can really apply data, but it has to be a balanced view. You have to look at it from the point of view of the perspective in which you're using the data, and data without insight is meaningless. So I think that's really key. I feel that if you don't draw the insight out of data and just look at it as a bunch of numbers, then you're not heading anywhere.
Right. Thanks, Kiran. Ajay, I have a question for you, and I know you probably set the tone in terms of how originality is so important and finding a great idea is so hard. But something that you have probably done in your company, and you probably have done it elsewhere in the world as well in your agency. I understand that you've gone beyond, let's say, an idea. In other words, it's not only the quality of the idea, but its ability to become a snowball movement. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of agencies now do it, but I think, can you hear me? Yeah, we call it, social movements. I think Dove does it. Lever is very good at it. So is Procter. It's how do you create an idea which gets part of the conversation? So what we've discovered in working with Procter and a lot of our other clients is that unlike the past, what we do is we take many bets. Even if it's one idea, we take multiple bets and throw it at the consumer. And then we use feedback, data, whatever, to tell us what's working, what's not working. And then honestly, it's amazing how sometimes the campaign and idea changes sort of course and starts taking shape. We would never have been able to do that if we didn't get sort of real-time data to tell us what is connecting emotionally. So it's still about emotion, but what is capturing someone's imagination because of what's happening in their context today. So we find constantly that our most powerful movements are the ones where we've picked up, like an antenna, the early sort of, information saying this is really working more powerfully than what we imagined first. And then we sort of therefore reshape. So I think what we find increasingly with data is it allows you actually to get better ideas and has a fantastic feedback loop.
Ajay, are you able to forecast that, or how do you actually,
No, so you go with judgment. So we already, I mean, we never work without data and insight. I mean, but I think as someone said, if data is the new oil, then like oil, it must be refined. So I think first of all, so I'm assuming that we're talking of refined oil and and not just data. But we do go, first of all, with some judgment which comes from the client, saying broadly, this is our belief. But we never are always right. And because of the way movements works, you don't do a single piece. You orchestrate and you do multiple pieces, right? And then it's amazing how sometimes something on the periphery is working so much more than your main thing. And then what's working on the periphery, because that's capturing the imagination of social conversation, we then magnify that, which would never have happened in the past. It would have remained on the periphery.
right? So, for example, if you're talking about the women against lazy stubble,
Right.
now somewhere somebody's taking a risk. Somebody's actually saying that this time let women talk about shaving. That itself is a huge leap.
So it's not a risk any longer. And again, we see how data helps us. So for example, and this is not only at our company at BBDO, but increasingly there's a lot of data, and I think over 1,000 case studies, which is basically saying that the most creative work is 11 times more effective. 11 times more effective. This is a global database, right? So that's startling, 11 times more effective. But what does that mean? So what does creative mean? So data has helped us isolate that basically campaigns which generate fame are even more powerful than pure emotion, and an emotion is more powerful than emotion plus rational, and the least effective is rational. It is effective. So that's the hierarchy. But what is fame? Fame basically is when it's surprising, when you challenge convention, when you break a taboo. So in the past, a client would have probably said, no, I can't do that because it's too risky. But now, you're managing his risk because you're saying I got 10,000 case studies of data. So in a way, data is helping liberate creative in my mind, where the client can take now not a risk, right? But it was a risk 5 years ago.
Right, thanks, Ajay. Krishna, just changing gears, since we've heard a lot about soft goods, but the world that you represent. Tell us a bit about how in the service industry or in the durable business, how have you used either, is it a process that you find that you can leapfrog in or change the way you were thinking earlier? Is there a cultural leap that you...
Yeah, firstly, service is purely an intangible. And that's because there's no exchange of goods, and therefore it is extremely difficult to get customers to be satisfied with your service, because they can't sense it with the 5 senses. They can't they can't feel it, and it's all about emotional satisfaction. Now that we are all talking of customer centricity today, and with companies focused on customer profitability, as against the shift from the earlier stance of just product profitability, almost every company has a good customer strategy in place, and it should have a good customer strategy in place. Now, to build customer strategies and to take right decisions, it is extremely important that you have a good knowledge of the environment, you have a good knowledge of your own operations, and you have a good due diligence of your own setup. Now, knowledge comes from the information that you have, and information comes from the raw data that you have. So I think that data is basically at the bottom of the whole pyramid, and it's like raw material which could lead into, which goes into the making of either a good recipe or a poor recipe. Now, excuse me. I've been a service management professional for the past 35 years, and have been an advisor for the past couple of years to some of the major brands. Let me share 1 or 2 experiences where, wrong interpretation of data or taking data at face value actually took the company for a toss and spiraled it off into a totally different direction. Because wrong interpretation of data can lead to formulation of wrong strategies. And if you have wrong strategies, then that could not just erode your customer confidence, it can do a lot of damage to the company. There was this company which wanted to have a louder presence in the consumer durable space. It's a very known brand in India. And they decided that for them to reach that position, it was extremely important that in this segment, their service be absolutely squeaky clean. Now, they had a very elaborate service setup already. And in the first 3-hour session that I had with the chairman, who gave me a debriefing on the whole situation, that one salient point which emerged was that they had a very sturdy third-party franchise service network. And they said that it's very sturdy, and apart from that, they are very loyal to the company, because most of them have hung around for almost about 15 years and 20 years. So I asked them how they measured this, and he said, well, the thing is, all our customer satisfaction surveys suggest that, the level of satisfaction is pretty high with the company. Okay, so I thought it would do good if I would pick up the voices of the key stakeholders before I set about the task of trying to convert this whole paraphernalia into a world-class service and trying to spot where the bugs were. The sales team was unanimous in its opinion that whereas a lot had to be done, the service franchisees were absolutely loyal, and that was one of the strengths of the company. The service department, which of course was expected to be defensive, yet backed up the franchisees, and they said, no, they're a good lot, and they're absolutely loyal. Some of them have their second generations running the show. When I spoke with the service franchisees, they gave me a list of endless problems that they were facing with the company. But at the end of the whole thing, they said that it's a good company, we like to continue to do business here. Now, the key take out of the whole thing was that how can so many intelligent people put together agree on one thing? There has to be there has to be a different opinion. So I said, let's flip the coin aside. When I delved into the processes, because service is an extremely process-intensive industry, I realized that the company's processes were absolutely defunct. There were so many loopholes and bottlenecks in the whole process, and the channel, being very smart, was busting every single process, and the company almost landed up paying for the working capital of all these 400 franchisees. So here was a set of channel partners who, without investments, were minting money. Now, if you ask whether this channel is loyal, no, this channel is not loyal. So that was the first myth that they had, because they didn't delve deep into the data, and they took it on face value that most of them want to do business with the company. Now, if a company has so many loopholes, and you ask the guy whether he'd like to do business with me, well, the guy's going to say, well, I'll tell the whole world that they should do business with you. Now, in the second example, I found that an organization which did not, again, interpret their data too well, landed up with very heavy service costs, and that was purely because they landed up with tons and tons of unused inventory. When I got to the bottom of it, I realized that their vendor management team had completely goofed up as far as their agreement with the vendors was concerned. So the agreement in place was, that the vendor said, since our products are good, we will give you, as a service backup support, we'll give you 1% of whatever is your offtake in terms of numbers. We'll give you 1% free of cost. And since failure rate is less than 1%, you'll be able to manage your service in that. Now, this was an arrangement which was continuing for many years for these people. So I said, okay, next time when you go to this vendor or go to any vendor for your negotiations, I'd like to pitch in. I told this person that, okay, if you're very confident that you're supplying this brand to a couple of, you're supplying this product ID to a couple of other brands and your quality is less than 1%, then let's do one thing. if it is 1%, I bear the entire cost. The company does not want any support from you. But if it is above 1%, then the entire cost goes to you. Now, I wasn't surprised, though my vendor management person, he was pretty surprised that in a jiffy, this person, he was a Chinese vendor, in a jiffy, this person says, okay, take 3%. Now, once he agreed on 3%, I said, okay, one more thing now. Now, on 100, you'll give me 3 pieces free, but then the entire 3 units don't fail. The failure rate may be 3%, but the entire 3 units don't fail because it's only 4 components or probably 5 components out of 700 components which are going to fail. So I want a budget equivalent to 3% of my offtake. And I will deploy that budget to buy whatever I want. Now, this turned around the entire situation, and they could bring down the inventories and keep active inventories.
Right. Sanjay, thanks.
Yeah.
In fact, I want to come back to that point. I
Yeah.
just want, in fact, Krishna, Sanjay to actually take.
Yeah, sure, please.
Well, I'd like to give slightly different perspective. If you look at when we talk about data and analytics and creative, it always looks like 2 different worlds. Like, one is left brain and right brain, and companies typically had 2 set of departments, and particularly service companies like us, like insurance or a bank or any telecom. I worked in telecom before, so there is a data department separately, or the marketing department which is supposed to work with agencies on creative process. This is different. But what has happened, like, bigger companies started playing with more number of customers. I think that the first merging has companies started understanding it's not like analyzing that, like, data alone will not really be the solution. Analyzing the data and making the data out of that, making out meaningful insights is the most critical part of it. So I saw the difference from 2002 on, like, 2 or 2003 onwards, like 10 years back. Actually, analytics started reporting. There are data become differentiated to 2 departments. One is analytics, one is BI or business intelligence. So business intelligence is nothing but they actually analyze the data, they make dashboards. So what it means is, like, whatever data company has, if you require data in a specific format, what we call as MIS or business dashboard, that department will do that. But analytics is a department, is closer to, works mostly with the marketing department in many companies currently. So their look at is like, look at more upon structured data to find out insight, which the other department will probably not get it. So given perspective in the sense, like, what is the, like, in our segment, like, customer really buy 4 or 5 policies in his lifetime. But look at other way around. If I got 5 million customer, every year, 1 million customer of my own customer base is buying another insurance product, but I don't know where. Out of that, if I look at a cross sell, it's only 100,000. So that means 900,000 of my existing customer are actually buying another policy, but I'm not really getting them. So what will make that happen? So one is, like, analytics team started working something called a propensity to buy model, like, what he can buy differently. But just propensity to buy will not alone help him to really buy. What is the kind of messaging has to be there? How the creative messaging has to be there to touch that customer segment? Again, good thing about that, with digital coming in currently, it has become much more what we call as, like, very, it is a process kind of thing. See, today you can do a lot of beta testing. You can do beta testing on a headline, you can do beta testing on the campaign, you can do testing on terms of what works. Like, I'll just give you 2 headlines, you'll understand. Like, one addiction clinic once tested saying that, addiction torments you and your loved ones. The other one, it gives you new beginnings. Tell me which one would have worked better. So it is the same thing, but they tested both the headline. First one worked 184% better than the last second one. So what makes more sense is how to really get that insight and work more on that. I'll recently give one example from our own product. We had a term product, which is a basic term product. Term product is something you give premium like car insurance. If you die, then you get a cover, so which is a basic product. So there are a lot of companies started doing it. Most of the companies started playing, reducing the price game, But unfortunately, in insurance, nothing like a lower price or a higher price. But finally, whoever is giving the claim is the most important part. But that you can't test it today. So most of the people started buying on a price platform. If you want to break out of that, it is not so easy. So what we tested is some idea saying that, why you are buying it? He said, no, my family need to be secured. But do you think your wife can take 1 crore and, really no, she doesn't know how to manage it. So we came out with another idea that, the pricing remained the same. We said, look, you can take 1 crore at one go, or you can take 1 crore over a period of time. Or you can take 1 crore at one go and another 1 crore over a period of time. So it will take care of your immediate liability, it will take care of the future liability. You can't believe that same product, the same money, this is basically customer's money. I'm just telling you, I'll structure it and give it to you. That market share, like we launched that product in August, the market share has gone up by 4 times. Business has gone up by 2 times. We are unable to, like, our backend is not matching up in terms of servicing the customer. So if you do, so today, because of the advance of analytics and the web and mobile, it gives a lot better platform in terms of using web analytics, in terms of using user interface analytics. If you look at e-commerce company as a perfect example, how they really use the entire thing together to make it happen. They test every single thing, starting from where the button has to be there, like, cart button has to be there, like, when they have to give the offer. So when, what time you are basically buying the offer. If you see, like, many of the e-commerce companies send you a thing like 8 to 10, 50% off. 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. All these are actually testing. So they test different messaging. They say what actually works for that. They prepare themselves for the big billion day sell. I think what we actually, most of the agencies and the marketeers, they actually forget is the objective of creativity is to increase business or increase engagement with the customer. So there is an objective behind it. If the objective can be better achieved by using analytics and using insight out of analytics, there is nothing like it. So I think all of us know about the famous Target example where the pregnancy message went to the father, kind of thing. But so that is how you can become, with using analytics better, you can become much more precise, much more one-to-one, much more direct, and much more meaningful to the customer. And you can create a community who are, like, much more engaged with your brand rather than only looking at creative.
Right, thanks. Okay, I just want to change raise the gear a bit on this discussion, because lovely to have all of you. In fact, I want to ask Kiran this. We all know that an insight, which we all agree is so important, that at the end of the day, that is really what will, create the inspiration for the leap, etc. But, at the same time, there is a lot of information that precedes before that insight emerges, right? So insight, nothing but a statement of the obvious, which existed around you, but now you're able to see it. Am I right? You always knew it is lying somewhere, and it's like you insight mine it. You're able to now, pull it out of the muck and make it into something relevant. So is there a process by which you can arrive at this? For example, over the years, have we broken through the shell of, still the room full of people, and then you sort of get some ideas, and then you listen to the customer, and then finally, the old-fashioned way, finally find out, okay, this is the way to do it? Or is there a better way in which, especially technology companies, with you doing so much futuristic work, is there a better way of finding these insights?
Tough question. So I've got 2 answers, if you don't mind. The first answer is where I'll wear my advertising hat. I used to be with Ogilvy many years ago. And so we were trying to create a positioning message for a tea brand, a brand of tea. And at that time, the tea market was extremely cluttered, too many brands standing for different values, right? So you had Taza, you had, Brook Pond, you had, that time it was Lipton, then you had this brand that I was handling called Brook Pond A1 Kadak Chhap Chai. I don't know if you've even heard of it. Very specialized segment. So we were trying to precisely do this. What does it stand for? Who's going to consume this tea, right? How do you sell this particular brand? And I was working with the brand manager of Levers, and he said, let's do an insight study. So we did an insight study, and you won't believe it. What came out of the study was tea in most parts of the country, if you leave the urban cities out, is actually drunk for sustenance. People sustain on tea. It's food, because they can't afford to buy food. So that was one insight that we got. Second is, how do you profile the tea drinker? How do you target the right tea drinkers for A1, the brand? So when we did a series of focus group discussions, and we went into markets to do tea tasting. We went to hot tea shops, sample teas, and very interestingly, what came out is the people who drank this tea were typically living in population strata of less than 50,000. So we're talking of very, very small villages. And the greatest insight we drew from the study was, why do you drink this tea? What makes you drink A1? They all said it's for inner courage or inner strength. And they were inspired the most by Amitabh Bachchan in the movies, because he stood for triumph of good over evil. Now, these are insights that you will never get. Of course, it completely, it's completely away from the world of technology and analytics. But this is a different kind of insight that drove creative for that particular brand. So the messaging was all around how good triumphs over evil. Then you had these commercials where there was a lawyer fighting for the good of the villagers and prevented a village from being razed down and all of that. So a lot of creative got inspired by that insight. But the way we obtained those insights in those days were through a simple study, simple discussion with people who drank the tea. We took a sample audience, a classic market research way of doing it, right? So that's one side of I would say the extreme end of data and insight. And then you come to the world of technology, where, to answer your question actually, is you can't get away from this world of big data. I mean, we did hear about it in the earlier panel. Some people said ignore it. Some people said, no, we got to live with it. I would say you have to live with it. And brands have to find a way of handling big data. And Sanjay, I'm sure you would agree. Because data is hitting us from everywhere. You just can't help it. Customers are empowered, they have access, they are sitting in your boardroom for all you know, and they're taking your decisions for you. So you can't really go away from the fact. Social media, video, audio, there is the web. So data is coming in from all directions. And I think unless you are equipped with the right technology engines to harness the data, which means you've got to first figure out the sources of data, in technology parlance, find out where do these data points come from. And then there are different technologies beneath that. For example, you can analyze data that's at rest or data which is in motion. There are two types of data. So data at rest is data that is sitting in your warehouse, right? Which is typically a structured data, like he said. Structured data can be analyzed through a number of technologies available today. The challenge is in analyzing unstructured data. Data coming to you in terms, for example, people calling you on a phone, some people tweeting to you, some people putting a post on Facebook. How do you connect those dots, right? How do you get a single view of the customer? Because the customer is coming to you in different forms. It's the same customer, right? A simple thing could be a credit card company that calls you, and then in the next few minutes, the same credit card company calls you again and calls you by a different name. So they have 3 sets of records, all pertaining to you, and they all call you by different names, right? So the fundamental aspect of how do you combine different sources of data from the same customer, put it in a kind of a concept called data warehouse, and then you clean the data, like you literally put them in a washing machine. You have to clean the data, and then you go back and structure the data once again to make sense out of it. So the process is long. It's not easy, because one is the fact that there is big data, and big data has got different concepts, like its speed of data. The pace at which data comes to you, you can't control. Second is volume of data. So you can't control whether it is a small stream or a large stream of data coming to you. And third is what we call veracity of data. Veracity is different types, right? Different packets of different forms and shapes and sizes. So there are simple and complex technologies, but I think the realization of a brand or of a marketer that data has to be used in the context of acquiring, retaining, and growing your customers has to come in. I think once a brand realizes that the data is inherently tied to this objective of, like, going back to what Drayton Bird said, the last slide when he spoke about keep your customer, acquire your customer, and he also said grow your customer, right? So it's fundamentally about that. So you link it all back, you need analytics. That's the only way to do it.
Okay, thanks, Kiran. Ajay, just coming back to, if you remember, we all started about what Confucius actually said about, in confusion lies clarity, right? And we often find that the case, whether you get hit by large slides or Excel, or somebody was talking about flood of data, and then try to make sense out of it. But is there a catch, like, we really want the big leap only comes from somebody who sees that data, somebody who who's trained to look through that? Or is there a better way of?
Yeah, so how have we changed over the last 20 years, right? So two things. One is what we've picked up purely from a creative point of view, is that we are now realizing that why is data so important? Because fundamentally, people cannot articulate what they go through. They cannot, right? Even I cannot. Simply because actually the word emotion is wrong, because if you read any neuroscientist, he says you don't understand emotion. What you understand is feeling. So emotion happens at a chemical level. It's dopamine, it's oxytocin. You have no control over it. So humans are 100% emotional, 100%, not 95-5, not 80-20, 100% emotional, and we are not rational, but rationalizers. So the beauty of, I suppose, data is it captures behavior, so which a person can't tell you, right? However intelligent the person is. So if you think of that as behavior and that capture, then you truly know what the guy is doing or what she's doing, which you would not have known if you went into even conducted 10,000, a quantitative with 15,000 people. So I think that's the one big thing we have seen. But what we practice now, I think, increasingly, is that there's no one person with some amazing insight. So we increasingly believe in prototyping. What does that mean? I think IDEO does this really well. IDEO is probably the best design company in the world. What they basically do is we get a broadly, we come to a broad strategy understanding. Then we start creating stuff. And we find sometimes that, someone cracks an insight in an expression. So we do early prototyping. We don't wait endlessly for the planner to come up with this pristine insight. So we move quickly, get your hands dirty, roll up your sleeves, and check it out with sometimes people, but certainly let in more people, and get into early prototyping. And that allows you sometimes to come up with a spark. It doesn't therefore have to come from the planner or the data scientist. It comes from the team, but you get into early prototyping.
So it's somewhat linked to this connected world that you're talking about, that the inspiration can come from probably somebody's post, or it can. Krishna, come back to, is there, in your experience, have you come across a situation in which you actually leapfrogged, not because of some research report or some data that you looked at, but any other way in which you sort of leapfrogged? Is it just gut feel, or was there any other way that you discovered?
No, at the crux of the whole thing is that you've got to constantly keep a tab on what are the customer expectations. Every company tries to do its best in terms of offerings to the customer. But if you look at it from the customer's point of view, he's the common sink and he has the maximum exposure, because he's the sink, he's the recipient of services from n number of companies. And what happens is that as soon as one company, it may be an unrelated domain from where he's taking service, but as soon as one company makes a special offering to him, he instantly extrapolates that to all the other companies and starts assessing them in his new experience and in new light. So almost every company has to continuously keep evolving new procedures and has to continuously keep a tab on the marketplace. So you have to keep a tab on the customer, and it is the customer who actually educates and who drives all these processes in a company.
Right. Thanks. Sanjay, coming back to one point, which I think we've all raised in different ways, but you can probably answer that. We all see that as at the end of the day, we are all saying there are, of course, the old way, which is an intelligent analyst is able to, a planner or even a writer, some people may not even have the benefit of a planner, but a writer who listens to consumers or listens to the brief and says, this is the idea. In your experience, there are two questions that always bothered me as a professional. When you spot an insight, is it your own judgment call, your own experience that say, okay, this is a big insight, or you look at something else and say, no, this is not a big insight? So at the end of the day, is it really the qualitative judgment of the marketing or consumer, whoever is taking a decision on whether that insight works or not? Or is there a better way, or have you over the years found a better way of doing this?
No, this is a very interesting question. I think it all bothers, and I'll just tell you, it is nothing related. So once I was reporting, long time back, I was reporting to Sasi Sankar, who's now IDEA CMO. So I asked him once, I said, how you find a good candidate when you are selecting someone? He said, Sanjay, is a very interesting question. 9 out of 10 times I go wrong. I don't know. I thought he's a good guy. He's not. Don't ask me, and from my judgment, it never worked. So most of the. So, no, he didn't interview me actually. So I was lucky. No, see that way. See, most often what happens, it's about. I think it's a iterative process. What traditionally we have followed. One is what I definitely look at. I look at the strength of conviction in the agency when they are presenting it. Same times I look at my own conviction, thinking that whether it is going to work or not. But I always did focus group before actually we gone this thing. Obviously, I'm not gone at a quanti research kind of thing. I never did a pre-testing of the ad before going it. But I definitely did quali research to understand whether it is actually touching or not. See, particularly I'm in this brand for a long time now. So it's a very emotional, insurance is an emotional kind of attachment. It's not, you are not seeing the value. It's like your family will see the value. And you have to give premium for 20 years. It is not something today you're buying an FMCG product or tomorrow you can change. It's not a chocolate or something you consumed and tomorrow you can change it. So once you buy it, you have to be with it for next 10 to 15 years. So what we really look at, whether it is really touching and emotionally connecting this thing. See, for example, our new communication when you are doing that father-daughter kind of thing. So it came from I actually told a couple of story to we are doing on Sarutha KGO, what next? We are doing it for 10 years. What next? How can you take it to the next level? I told a couple of stories, what personally really touched it. One is that volleyball player, when she was been thrown out of the train, she lost her legs, she went to Mount Everest. So that, that leg thing came from there. Then I saw one of my daughter's friend, how she has been raised by her father. So I actually told multiple stories. So the agency came out how to link both the things. Then we actually went and tested, like, really, are the people getting it? Are the people thinking? It is like, the father's job is not only just provide financial independence, but, making emotionally independent and providing independence. That's a bigger role rather than just putting money kind of thing. So then this thing actually come out. So I believe it is important to go and talk to your target audience, because most of the time if you are not talking, you'll probably go wrong. You might have seen in the election, most of the time you believe some party will win. Then you completely then surprised saying that how the hell they have lost out. Because we are not touched with customer, because the world we live in, sometimes you might be completely away from the customer. So whatever senior you are or whatever conviction you have, it is always better to at least test in few centers. Even simple things like, some of the things what works in North doesn't work in South. Like, for an insurance brand, we wanted something like, in the child birth, can we really test it and say that, you buy a policy, it is completely inauspicious in South. Like, if you buy something at birth, so it doesn't work out in South context. So if you not test that, you go with that communication, it'll be, say, inside might be really great because you want to capture young, but, it may not really work out. So there are multiple things that is important. In a data world, because that's what I was telling, now the testing has become much more simpler. It is like, you have got behavioral analytics available. So you can quickly know whether people are liking it or not. People are, even changing the brand colors, you're looking at the logo. So all those things has become much more easier rather than, so much of a qualitative call and you go and then you discover. I think beta testing is the way for everything going forward.
Sure, except that, to some extent, I'm a bit of a critic of that, because what you're really doing is, let's see what works, and hoping that one of them will
First,
work.
you have to get that insight right. You have to believe in that insight.
And then
So
fine-tune it.
I'm not really taking that out. Unless you believe in it, it is not that what other people.
Correct.
You and your agency need to really believe that it's
Sure.
going to work for your brand. Then you fine tuning.
Then
You
you
can
do
always do it.
Okay, I'll come to one more question, which I think is a very key question, which has always concerned me, and certainly I don't know whether it has bothered some of you. Most of the time when we look at data, it's always in the past, right? I mean, in the sense, whether you look at a report or... And sometimes we've been told now that in today's context, if you look at a research report which is 3 months old, the audience that you're talking to may have changed their opinion by the time you take action on it and by the time that's actually implemented. So, therefore, are we able to, in this world, have an answer to this? Will we always be victims that we will always do research in the past and then hope that trends will continue? Or is there a better way of forecasting, or, in other words, more crystal ball gazing based on it rather than strictly interpreting what you've seen?
So I'll need to get a little technical here, because that's the only way to answer this question. So I think the science of analytics has gone beyond just looking at trends and past data. So that's data that's available, and data shows you that in the past this is how things have happened. But today we are talking of something called predictive analytics. So analytics that uses the same data, and it's got a complex set of algorithms it runs on the data, and it gives you a sense of prediction. It tells you if this data performs in this way, this is how it's going to move, this is what will come out of it. If data goes this way, this is this is what's going to come out of it in very simplistic terms. So I think the data and analytics itself straddles different spectrums. So you've got prescriptive, you've got descriptive, you've got predictive, and you've got cognitive. So there's a huge family of things you can do with analytics. Cognitive is the highest level of intelligence, where, like I said, human language interface. So a computer understands human language. It learns to emote and communicate with a human being, right? For example, there was this whole game of chess that was played between the Big Blue and I think Garry Kasparov, and the computer beat Garry Kasparov. Then there is this computer that played a game called Jeopardy in the US, and Jeopardy is again like a quiz game. It's a television show, highly rated, and the computer beat the participants on Jeopardy, and that's Watson, and that's what you're going to see sometime in the evening today when you look at the recipes that's been created. It's all created by this computer. So you have different extremes of analytics. That computer analyzes human language and different sources of data in different forms and throws out a recipe which it thinks is the best recipe. So that's a different form of analytics. So there are these different.
But Kiran, sorry, yeah.
Correct. So I think.
In other words, you're minimizing room for error.
Yeah.
But
so
my question is a little more broader than that. Can that set of, let's say, complex machine behavior, can it give me a better baseline than Sir Uthake Jio, for example?
Well, that's a difficult one because, yeah, I think.
No, I don't mean to be facetious. All I'm saying is, I think, yeah. Yeah.
I'm saying, supposing I put this information out there, which is available to a lot of, let's say, 1,000 minds or 10,000 minds like us, who might be professional creative guys or just hobbyists in creative. Won't we come out with a better idea? Won't there be a better idea and a more relevant idea? Whether it's better or not is not. It's not an absolute better, but it is definitely relevant to the audience because I'm creating it for you and I know you intimately.
Yeah, but there's just a more talented person taking a crack at it. What you're saying is the person assigned to the job may not do it, somebody else.
Talent is not any different.
Yeah.
You are not more talented than me or I am not. If they are relevant in particular context, it's humanity. If that whole bunch of guys.
So you're saying find a way to enlarge the pool so you get a better.
Yeah, so how do you identify people, the consumers and the users?
How do you identify those minds?
Crowdsourcing is an example for you. You're reaching out into the crowds.
He's using the method and he's saying there could be a brilliant writer lost out there who has an idea. In fact, this is quite relevant because it goes back to I started life as a focus group researcher, and one of the things we did on a brand which all of you still remember today and know today as a huge brand, but I don't know whether all of you know Britannia Good Day, which is one of the largest brands of Britannia, was actually ready to be launched. Pack was ready, and it was going out as Britannia Cookies. And the first job I did, in fact, in Lintas was to say, how can you call this cookies? Because India does not have a baking culture. I mean, the thought of calling a very, very rich, high-fat biscuit cookies, it means you'll only talk to a few small number of people who understand what a cookie is and who are used to baking, and even smaller number who will expect Britannia to do that. Your grandmother might do a better job of that. So everything about it was wrong. So we researched it, and the 7th focus group which I attended, one lady sitting in a corner said, after I ate this biscuit, I feel I've had a good day. She actually said it. And I picked it up from there, and in this case it came from a consumer. And then have a good day became associated with it. The power of that woman's contribution to that was the leapfrog. So we all know how a room full of people can generate, and there still isn't a better way. I've come across many ways, and I'm happy that there are ways in which you can cut down risk, and many of the, for example, I take your point about sport. I was watching the India-Pakistan match. There's an amazing statistic that kept coming. So one thing which I will not forget. that if India has gone past a certain score with just 4 wickets down, they have won 70% of the matches. This was a piece of studies, right? So I said this, I mean, that is such a precise piece of information, which I'm sure is based on.
So the next level, if you watch the ticker at the bottom, it spoke about how the bounce rate on the pitch is impacting that bowler.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the next level of analytics.
That's
So
right.
the
And how
previous
many times,
example was
how
fast
many
rate.
times this batsman has actually been bowled by left armour, and where the ball has pitched at a certain, even that.
Correct.